Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar entitled Managing Your Dual FCA and SEC Compliance Obligations Using Software. My name is Philip Naughton, a Director of Cordium, and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. With me today, we have Derek McGibney, Managing Consultant and Head of our Regulatory Transactions team at Cordium UK, and Jordan Swartz, a Managing Director of Cordium US. Over the next hour, we'll have an introduction from myself. Derek will give us an overview of the benefits of compliance automation, and Jordan will, as the core of the event, take us through product demonstrations of both compliance employee level filing, or ELF, and also compliance track. By the end of the seminar, we hope you'll conclude, as I have, that these systems are invaluable tools in understanding and managing single as well as multi-jurisdictional regulatory obligations. There'll be a few closing remarks from myself and then an opportunity for questions and answers. If you do have any questions as we go through the webinar, please feel free to submit them online. We'll be noting them as they're received and we'll pose them as we go, or if most or more appropriate, we will deal with them at the end. That's myself, Philip Naughton, Director of Cordium, and then moving into the introduction. So firstly, just a little bit of background and context about Cordium. It was formed through the merger of IMS Consulting in the UK and Hedge Up Compliance in the US, and we are now a global regulatory compliance consulting firm with offices, as you can see, London, New York, Boston, San Francisco, and more recently, earlier this year, in Hong Kong. Currently, globally, we support over 800 investment businesses, and in the context of the software we're about to look at, we have 200 firms using the software, which in total amounts to over 5,000 individual users, particularly with the employee level filing, or ELF system. We're confident that the usage of these systems will significantly increase with the rollout of both in the UK, of which this is part. As mentioned earlier, software has been an offering in the US for over 8 years and is very tried and tested. So here's a slide. Looks very busy, and that's just how a lot of you as compliance officers and firms will feel at the moment. I'm sure there's a number of elements in that look very familiar. You can hardly pick up the trade press or read an article these days without seeing some regulatory change in most major jurisdictions. Dodd-Frank and the SEC, CFTC, FCA, FINRA, we're all seeing change. From our perspective, we're actually seeing institutional investors subjecting firms to increasing levels of due diligence. In the last 6 months, this due diligence has escalated in so much that we're having increasing contact from those institutional investors with ourselves, requesting meetings to discuss the nature and detail of services we provide to investment managers, which the institutions are considering investing with. This all means that firms have to be on their game when it comes to compliance and meeting and demonstrating that they're meeting their obligations. So, meeting multi-jurisdictional challenges. You've got multiple regulators, particularly over in the US, and firms in the UK will be subject to multiple regulators. In the UK, multiple regulators. We're getting globalization of compliance obligations, and that's happening at a regulatory perspective, and also at a firm level, where firms are adopting a global policy which is more efficient and taking the highest bar in the jurisdictions in which they operate. The UK and the US, attributed to George Bernard Shaw, two countries divided by a common language, and we have that to a degree with the requirements of individual regulators, particularly if you are, as the presentation is focusing on today, SEC and FCA dual regulated firms. So you will have different obligations, terminology might be slightly different, and that can create confusion or uncertainty. We've got situations where regulatory inspections are taking place, both in the UK, but more on a thematic basis than historically focusing on a top-to-tail review of a firm, but in particular of late SEC inspections in the UK. The first of these, from our experience, took place over a year ago, and then since then there seems to have been somewhat of a lull, with more activity notably taking place in August and quite a number of visits during September, with, as you may have read, these being scaled back in whole or in part. One of the systems that when I'm talking to clients about the regulatory obligations, I'm a fan of, and I use fan in a very broad sense, is the Gabriel system, which a lot of you will be familiar with from making your financial returns. I'm a fan of it in so much that it helpfully tells you what you need to do, when you need to do it, and how. So you submit your FCA 001s, 2s, 3s, and so on online. That was developed about 2 years ago, enhanced, that you could then get a reminder that you need to submit what are known as your non-Gabriel papers, your controllers, close links, and accounts. So regular reporting systems can be helpful because they tell you what you need to do when you need to do it. The problem firms have is they may not wholly understand, or they may miss something that they need to carry out internally as a process, a rule they need to demonstrate compliance with, or even sometimes a regulatory return. Gone are the days when you did have a regulator who stuck to its own geographical territory, and it significantly changed with the advent of Dodd-Frank and UK entities having to register as full SEC registrants or exempt reporting advisors. So I'd now like to introduce you to Derek McGibney, who will discuss the benefits of compliance automation. Derek is head of our regulatory transactions team in the UK and has spent time in the US with US colleagues building out solutions for UK clients and seeking efficiencies in respect of day-to-day compliance work. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Philip. Good afternoon. So, moving on to the benefits of compliance automation. As you can see, managers continue to become more global in nature, and firms face an unprecedented level of regulatory scrutiny. Yes, again, it's another year of unprecedented regulatory scrutiny. The G20 in 2009, in response to the financial crisis, challenged itself to address international regulatory risks. As a result of this call to action, countries introduced new regulations to address those risks based on common objectives. While these regulations follow the same global plan to address international compliance risks, there are subtle differences which need to be mapped, as each regulator exercises their right to demonstrate that they act as an effective deterrent. So, using an effective task management system will enable you to meet the global demand being placed on you and your compliance resources, assisting your stakeholders in tracking their compliance responsibilities. It simultaneously allows you to easily evidence due process. So what will automation do for you? Well, it will assist you in keeping up with the ever-changing regulatory environment. Cordium will provide updates to task templates as required and will be published to the users when needed. We're going to allow you to focus more time on the other parts of your business and focus on pressing issues that you really have to deal with immediately. Automation will allow you to better handle due diligence queries and allow for easier reporting, and generally build a more efficient compliance infrastructure that you can be proud of to successfully manage your obligations. Specifically, in managing your day-to-day compliance responsibilities, like maintaining a current up-to-date to-do list, identifying your priorities easily, identifying quickly when you're getting behind, and allowing you ultimately to plan more effectively. With respect to your employees, allowing you to track and document adherence to policy and procedures without the hassle, administration, and paperwork usually associated with employee compliance administration. And then, in dealing with the employee compliance issues, you spend less time on that administration and more time to effectively deal with issues as they arise. It helps you monitor your compliance risk. It also particularly helps you understand the compliance regimes in different jurisdictions and comparing your obligations. For example, we all know SEC has a code of ethics requirement, whereas the UK specifically focuses on conflicts of interest. Both of these requirements produce similar tasks, and by using automation, you can combine these requirements to create an efficient process for you and your employees. I also highlight commission disclosure as an area where there are slight and subtle differences, but need to be managed in the same way or at the same time. Recently, I've had some experience looking at various rules relating to gifts, inducements, anti-bribery, foreign corrupt practices, ERISA requirements, and pay-to-play rules, all of which have similar requirements for firms to undertake specific tasks relating to their employee disclosures and collecting information. If this can be all done in one centralized location and the records can be kept, the benefits are clear. I also recently was looking at business continuity, which is something that all regulators are looking at, including institutional investors. Obviously, doing it at the same time and following a higher standard and identifying what those standards are creates an efficiency straight away. And finally, another area that there are certain benefits in using automation is in relation to training and competency, fitness and properness, and disclosure reporting. Because obviously these questions are important to answer, are an administrative burden, but are useful to ensure, or it is useful to ensure that your employees are regularly reviewing the disclosures they need to make to regulators in relation to their fitness and properness. Generally, this is all about dealing with the multiple tasks that you have to undertake as a regulated firm, but timing the activities right for the ultimate efficiency gain. And now I'd like to pass you back to Philip.
Thank you very much, Derek. Yeah, time and time I've seen, I'm sure Derek has seen, and a lot of our consultants have seen, that when firms get into difficulties, it has been down to a failure process and record keeping. You've got to prove it, and prove it again, and having some central way in which you can demonstrate it and manage that process is very helpful. So I'd now like to introduce you to Jordan Schwartz, a Managing Director of Cordium US. Jordan is ultimately responsible for our group compliance software offering and manages a team of developers and customer service support personnel in the US.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Derek. So now we are going to take a look at the compliance tools that we at Cordium have developed. Just a bit of background on those tools before we actually go and take a hands-on demo. Cordium has been developing compliance software tools for over 8 years now. We were the pioneers of compliance automation in the United States. And with our merger with IMS 2 years ago, we've taken our software expertise to Europe. We've been working very closely with our consultants, both here in the UK as well as our compliance consultants in the United States. And we've built a suite of compliance tools to make your life easier and assist with a lot of the day-to-day compliance tasks that you as a manager have to deal with. So we have 2 software tools that we're going to be taking a look at today. The first is called Compliance ELF, which Philip mentioned, stands for Employee Level Filing. This was designed to create an electronic portal for all of your employee compliance issues. This includes things like personal dealing, trade pre-approvals, affirmations and questionnaires and conflict disclosures, your fitness and proper tests and questionnaires, training and competency record keeping, conflict management, annual sign-offs, and then a wealth of SEC-specific code of ethics compliance issues, which, as of course is the focus of this webinar, is a very important thing for any manager that is registered with the SEC. Compliance ELF is a customizable application. It gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how to build it out. It also has an easy-to-use interface for both employees and admin or compliance users. We know that typical employees of a firm that are using the system don't really want to be spending time doing compliance tasks, And so we try to make the experience very easy for them by designing a very user-friendly, easy-to-use interface. ELF also puts one-click reporting capabilities at your fingertips. So instead of doing things the old-fashioned way, on paper, filing cabinets full of hard copy reports, or having to search through folders of emails, with just a few clicks of your mouse, as you'll see in just a few minutes, you're able to pull down data from Compliance ELF and be able to report on that information very quickly and very seamlessly. Our second tool that we're going to take a look at today is called Compliance Track. This is centered around an interactive compliance calendar. This tool has a built-in knowledge base for both FCA as well as SEC compliance tasks, and although it is not the focus of this webinar, it also has a knowledge base for CFTC as well as FINRA broker-dealer compliance regulations as well. The nice thing about this knowledge base is that it gets updated as regulations change. We have staff both in the UK and the United States who are constantly monitoring the regulators for new rule releases, comment letters, and whatnot. And as things change, as new rules are released, we make additions to our knowledge base in Compliance Track, alert our clients about that, and you're then able to take a look and sort of add that to your workflow if it applies. Compliance Track also allows you to both monitor and report on risk in your firm as well. So without spending any more time on background, we figured the most productive way for you to see the benefits and sort of features of these two tools is to jump right into them. So what we're going to do here is share our desktop, and we are going to jump into a live view, and we're going to start with Compliance ELF. Again, this is employee-level filing. Both of our applications are web-based applications, so all that's needed to access them is a web browser and an internet connection. There's really no sort of installation that needs to be done from sort of a setup and IT perspective. There's no software that needs to be installed on the user's end. It's a very sort of easy and simple cloud-based solution. So Compliance ELF, as we've talked about, was really designed to handle employee compliance. And as such, every single employee at a manager will get a login to this system. Compliance users, or what we call admin users, will have access to these tabs, the admin view and the personal view. A regular employee who's not a compliance employee will only have access to the personal view. They actually will not see the tabs at all. When they log in, they're taken right in. So we're going to walk through some of the main, we're going to try to highlight some of the main features of Compliance ELF here. And again, as Philip mentioned early on, if you do have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to ask them. There's a Q&A window in the WebEx that you can use. And while we're in screen sharing mode here, you should see a green tab at the top of your screen, and if you hover over that, it will bring down a little bar where you can input in your questions. So one of the first features we're going to look at here is in regards to PA dealing. ELF has electronic connections to about 2,800 different brokerage institutions worldwide. And what this allows you to do is it allows employees to come in and create a seamless electronic connection to their personal brokerage accounts. You can see here our demo user has 2 accounts that are listed. The process, though, is very simple. You come in and you can search our wizard. We have both U.S. and global institutions as well. I just sort of pulled up a list here of some of the UK institutions that we support. And employees come in, and within just a few minutes, they're able to create a secure sort of read-only connection to their brokerage accounts so that all of their positions and transactions data will automatically start to flow into the Compliance ELF system. That data gets updated on a nightly basis, and from a review perspective, basically gets rid of the need to get hard copies of employee statements and review those manually. For users that might have accounts at institutions that we don't support, we obviously do our best to support as many different brokerage institutions as we can, but there are also mechanisms to both import data via Excel or CSV files, as well as upload statements via PDF and also input in that information manually. So there's lots of different options on how to capture that PA trading data and information. As it relates to SEC Code of Ethics compliance, for firms that are duly registered, the SEC, as Derek mentioned, has very specific Code of Ethics guidelines. where in the UK it's more around reviewing conflicts and knowing what your employees are doing. It doesn't really get as specific as the SEC does in the Advisors Act rules. There's an Advisors Act rule called 204A-1, which specifies very specific reports that employees need to fill out and what the timing on those reports are required to be. So an example of that is the initial holdings report. Every new employee at a firm, when they become an employee, they have 10 days to report all of their positions to the compliance manager. As an SEC advisor, that's something that you're required to do. What this does is add some structure around those specific reports. And so you'll see here that under the personal trading menu, we break this down by those different types of reports: initial holdings, annual holdings, and then quarterly transactions. So as an example, if I was a new employee and I started at my firm, I would get an email, I'd log into the system, and I'd have a few action items listed that I need to complete. The first one is connect to my brokerage accounts. Once I do that, it will actually populate my initial holdings report here. We have a built-in security master in the application with over 4 million global securities, so any data that is downloaded from your brokerage accounts will automatically be matched to that security master, and you'll see it will show all of the identifying information. And we use that to normalize all of the data for some of the rule checks that we'll talk about in just a bit. So anyway, I have my initial holdings report. I'm able to come in. I can add any private investments that I may have that maybe would not come in from a brokerage account, and then I can sign off and submit my report. Pretty much, as we said in the beginning, everything in this system can be customized, including the signature language that employees sign off on. So what we do as part of the implementation process is we'll take any paper forms that you may have and we'll use the same language so things are consistent across all of your documents. If you're newly registered as an SEC advisor, maybe you don't have forms for these things. We do have templates for everything so that you can use those as well. And what this does is really add the structure for you surrounding all of these very specific code of ethics rules. If you're registered as an ERA, you might not have as specific requirements, and again, we can tailor the application down so that you're able to capture what you need without the specificity of perhaps the SEC Code of Ethics rules. On the subject of PA dealing, another feature of Compliance ELF is trade pre-approval. Firms oftentimes have policies whereby employees need to get approval before making a trade in their own personal account. That is all handled through here electronically. This is an example of a typical pre-clearance form, and what would happen is the employee would search for the instrument that they'd like to make a trade in, and once that's selected, again, it will sort of pull the data from the security master. They'd fill out a couple of other fields here, and then once that is submitted and signed off on, it automatically will send a notice to the compliance team letting them know that there is a pending request. At that point, it will also run some rule checks. So you can actually set up a restricted list in the system here, or multiple restricted lists, and you can have pre-approval requests automatically scan against those lists so that they will get denied automatically if it matches up against that. There are some other rules that you can run as well, and if it passes all of the rules, the request would then be reviewed by a compliance manager, and an email would then be sent back to the employee letting them know whether or not they have the proper approval to make that trade. This, of course, also keeps an archive of everything that's done. So for this particular employee, I can see that I've made two trade requests before. One was approved and one was denied. And if I click into the one that was denied, I could see that this was actually denied because it was a match to our restricted stock list. Moving along the menu here, now we're moving out of the realm of PA dealing into some other compliance, employee compliance areas. The section called attestations, this really deals with any sort of affirmation or sign-off that employees might need to do. This is typically used to have employees sign off on policies and procedures when they change, to sign off on training presentations, but this is a customizable engine and can really be used for anything. It's very easy to come in as a compliance user and create one of these attestations, and you can assign them to either all employees or certain employees that you designate. And this is obviously a very simple example of one, but we have a document here that you need to click on, and then some acknowledgments that you'll need to sign off on. But again, these are customizable, and these can be as simple or complex as you need them to be. ELF can also handle things like gifts reporting, political contribution requests, outside activity submissions, and again, like everything else in the system, it's very, very flexible and very customizable. We have templates for all of these things, but we can also create custom forms for you. Again, if you're a SEC registered advisor and you don't have these forms, there are templates available, but we very often take existing forms that clients have or even other forms that they want to use, and really anything that employees might be required to do, we can create as an electronic form here that can be filled out. These notifications you can also turn on pre-clearance. So if you have a policy whereby gifts or business entertainment need to be pre-approved first, you could turn on a setting, simple click of a button, and there will be then a requirement for a compliance manager or compliance team member to first review those filings. And then like everything else in the system, of course, record keeping is one of the goals here. We have a nice record of everything that has been submitted. And finally, we have questionnaires. These are typically used for things that are done annually or as needed by employees, your fit and proper test, your initial compliance undertaking. These are all sort of template forms that we have, as well as, again, some US SEC forms. But again, we can sort of come in and create any types of forms that you may need to fill out. And again, it's sort of a nice, easy way for you to capture this data from your employees. A good example of the fit and proper test is, of course, a best practice to have employees annually certify whether anything has changed or not. There's a nice feature here where you can set up a new questionnaire each year and pull in all the responses from the previous one. That way employees just need to go in and confirm whether or not any of those responses have changed in the past year. And so it makes that process very seamless for them, where they don't have to go through and re-answer every single one of the questions in that form. We've been working in the personal view. I'm going to jump over now to the administrative view and take a quick look at what some of the admin features are as a compliance manager. You'll see that the menu structure is pretty much the same, and the only difference is that we can view the information here for all of our users, all of our employees. There's email reminder functionality here, so you can very easily send emails out to employees that are behind or have not yet submitted something by simply checking the box here and clicking send email. All of these emails are customizable. There's templates that you can edit and modify in the system. You can run reports very easily on all of the data here. So an example is our pre-clearance section. And you can see here that there's a lot of different filters that you can produce and sort this information by date range, by employee, by security, and you can either export that data to Excel, like I'll show you here, and it looks like we have a pop-up blocker, or PDF. And pretty much everything in the system can be exported to both Excel and PDF format, giving you very easy reporting access, whether it be for more internal reporting purposes or external reporting purposes, where you may need to produce information for a regulator. And this is a good example of an Excel export. With the Essentials platforms, it's the same thing. You can very easily view here who has signed off, who has not signed off on a particular item, and you can send out reminder emails and, again, run Excel or PDF exports in the system. Every filing in the system has a comment feature, which is used as an audit trail. So you can leave comments in here to track sort of compliance notes, internal compliance notes. You can also use this as a mechanism to follow up with employees if you have questions about their submissions. When you leave a comment in a particular report and check a box here, when you send that comment, it will email the employee with the text of your comment, and all of that gets archived within that particular filing and within that particular report. As it relates to PA dealing, again, very simple to come in and sort and archive and report on that data as well. You can see here this is a transactions report. If we wanted to run a quick view of what trades have people been making, we can come in, select the date ranges here, and then run a quick report to view that data. We can also run reports to compare employee trading versus firm trading. We have the capability to pull in data from pretty much any OMS or trading system. So you can actually populate this system with your firm's holdings data or trading data and then use that to adequately compare and run reports on that information as well. And obviously from a conflict monitoring perspective, that is usually a pretty important thing to do, and also from an SEC perspective, that is something that the SEC as a regulator will always look for and ask for. You have full capabilities in the system to add your own users. So as you get a new employee, you add them to the system here, and this basically acts as their compliance onboarding system. So as I mentioned, in the personal view, there's always an action item list where they'll have a to-do list of all of the things that they need to do in order to be compliant. And as a new employee, they're able to go in and sort of check off those items as they go through and ensure, and you can ensure that they're doing everything that they need to be doing. I'm going to stop here and see if Derek or Philip have anything else to add before we move on.
No, I think it's very customizable. It's based on rules. You can introduce your own personal and corporate processes. The forms can be tailored. The reporting is there, full audit trail.
And actually, that's the flexibility of the system is a good point. This was designed so that end users, compliance users, can come in and pretty much customize any aspect of the system themselves. So you'll see here, this is a settings page, and you know, everything from picking your date format to uploading your firm's logo to editing the email templates that are used to send out reminders can all be done right here by end users. So it is very simple to use. We also do, of course, have a support team which supports this software, and we're available via a help desk, email support, phone support, and live chat support to, of course, answer any questions that you as a compliance user may have or that end employee users may have as well.
I thought a useful feature also that you could show is where documents need to be read. There's a little trick of the system.
Yes, of course. Whenever you, when you do create an attestation, typically again for a compliance manual, the system is smart enough to not allow a user to sign off on that unless they've actually clicked and opened and read the document. So I think if we click here, you'll see if I try to sign off, it's going to first prompt me that I must view the document. So ideally, this will get users to open up those documents and take a look at them before actually just signing off.
At the very least. And then I think it was quite a good function about when you add a particular attestation and how easy it is for the compliance officer to add a new document or a new...
Yeah, it's very, it's less than a 5-minute process for a compliance manager to come in and create a new attestation. It's literally come in, you add a title here, you could put in a description, you decide which users you want this to apply to, you put in a due date, you add your acknowledgments, and you can even customize the radio buttons there, agree, disagree, yes, no, to whatever you'd like, and then you can upload multiple documents here. The system has no limitation on how many documents and the size of documents that you upload, and we do accept Word, PowerPoint, PDF, Excel, text, email files, all the common formats that may need to be used in a web-based system.
Thanks.
Great. Well, what we're going to do now is move on to our second web-based tool here that is called Compliance Track. While Compliance ELF system, as we mentioned, is typically used by everybody at the firm, Compliance Track is generally used by compliance managers or the compliance team or personnel that might be helping the compliance officer. Compliance Track is really designed to be the sort of end-all, be-all compliance reference resource for your firm. It was really designed to be the focal point for your compliance program. And whether you're a duly registered manager like we're focusing on today or a singularly registered manager with the FCA or the SEC or the CFTC, this is a tool that you can use to track everything that you're doing. One of the first things that you'll do when you start using Compliance Track and that we will help you with during the implementation process is fill out a pretty simple logic profile. The main point of that profile is to tell us a bit about your business. Are you FCA registered? Are you SEC registered? Are you registered as an ERA? Are you CFTC registered? And then what type of funds, if any, you're managing. What that will do is customize the system in a way that makes it easier for you to see exactly what you need to be thinking about. Now, the main focal point of Compliance Track is an interactive compliance calendar. The idea is that, as Philip mentioned, firms nowadays have dozens and dozens and dozens of things that they need to be thinking about, worrying about, whether it be US, UK, other jurisdictions. And a lot of the times the difficulty lies in how do I track everything that I need to do, how do I know what I'm supposed to do, and then how do I evidence that I'm actually doing it. And that's exactly where this tool comes in. So what we do is we help you build out this calendar using a set of default tasks, and these will be customized based upon that logic profile. So our sample manager here, we have checked off that they're SEC registered and FCA registered. And so you'll see here there are a good number of tasks here that we recommend. The nice thing about these tasks is that each one, when you click into it, will give you some background regulatory information. So it will describe to you what the task is, why you need to do it, when you need to do it, how often you need to do it, and it will very often give you links to some third-party websites where you can get more information or learn more about exactly what this particular item is. For our clients that use this, that are based in the UK, that have recently had to register with the SEC, they find this an invaluable tool because more times than not, they don't have internal resources who really are familiar with SEC compliance. So what this does is it builds out a workflow for them where they now know every day, every week, every month what SEC tasks they need to be thinking about and then exactly what those tasks are and what they mean. Same thing goes for FCA tasks. There are obviously a lot of items that are built here. Some are monitoring items, some are more housekeeping items, some are regulatory filings. And just like we looked at with the SEC, you have the same sort of setup here with your FCA tasks. So if we click into one, you'll see this is the annual controller's report, and you can see here that we have a lot of information here describing the rule reference, exactly what this means, what you need to be thinking about, what items you need to look at. And then we end it always, because the FCA is so nice to provide this, a link to the FCA handbook where you can view more information about this particular item. With all of the calendar items on here, you're going to have your standard sort of recurrence pattern set up so that you can determine how often you'd like these items to recur and when you'd like them to occur. There are also email reminders that can be set up here. So what you're doing here is actually choosing the number of days before a task is due that you'd like to be reminded, and you can have multiple reminders here. And then you're picking recipients of those reminders, which generally will be your employees. And employees will then receive an email, either a daily digest email, which is a summary of everything that you need to do for that day, or a separate email for every compliance task, depending on how you'd like to set that up. And it will basically ping you and then pull you into the system when it's actually time to complete one of these tasks.
I mean, if a task is not complete by the due date, the list for the next day, obviously that's cumulative. It rolls up.
Exactly. It will remind you if you'd like it to. Exactly. It will remind you if you'd like it to that you still have these outstanding tasks previously that you have not yet completed, and it will actually sort of annoy you until you actually go in and check off that you've completed that particular item.
Just have the regulator.
Yes. There's also a section here where you can upload documents. This is typically used for template documents related to a particular task. So you have a repository of templates that can be used by your staff.
And also, if you've made that controller's return, which you make by email, you can upload the email to evidence its submission.
Exactly. So that's actually the next step, which is the workflow element to this. So you have a very pretty colorful calendar here. You have these reminders set up, so you're starting to build a nice system to really be able to track everything that you're doing. The next step in that process is to be able to evidence that you're actually doing those things. And the way that you do that is you would click on a particular task here. We can hover over it and it shows us a little description. And once we've completed that, we're able to come in and mark off that we've completed this task. Here's the date that we completed it on. We could type in some notes here, and then we can upload documents here as well, which in that case would be the controller's report. Whatever documents that you may create or generate as part of that particular item can be uploaded and stored here. And again, this all goes back to building a compliance repository for you so that you can easily evidence and pull down this information when you're looking for it. You can also add custom tasks. So although we have obviously a very nice knowledge base, we give you a lot of information. Oftentimes managers will have other items that they want to capture in here, whether they be more operational in nature, maybe tax related. And so you can come in and create a task for pretty much anything under the sun that you would like to track. The setup process is the same, the reminder process is the same. The only difference is that there is no background regulatory information that's listed for a custom item. Once you're using the calendar, you have, again, we've developed a nice workflow. You now know what you're supposed to be doing and when. You can run reports on this information. So as an example, we can run a monthly report to show what we have done and what we still need to do for the month of September. And it will generate a report into Excel showing you all of the tasks, the items, the info, the notes that we typed, and the date that we completed each of those items. So this can be used both internally to report up to management as well as externally from a regulatory perspective to provide to a regulator when asked. There's a yearly view, which might scare you a bit when you see it, although this one is not too bad. We do have a daily task here, which kind of clutters it up a bit. But generally, this is a very nice view to view exactly what is outstanding, what needs to be done, and what is coming up in the future. There's an audit trail feature, so you can actually see if you did have multiple users using this, what are people doing in the calendar, what is your staff doing on here, and when. And then there's finally a document library, which will show you any of these documents that you've uploaded to the system, and it will let you filter those documents by date or by task so that you can easily view them, and you can actually select multiple documents and download them back to your computer into a zip file. So very easy. We talked a bit about SEC audits in the beginning and how the SEC is starting to show their face a bit more in the UK. The way that an SEC audit typically operates is they send you a request list requesting a lot of documentation. By using this system, you're able to come in, and if you've been actively using it, you can produce a lot of that data and a lot of that information right from your repository here. Moving on, a couple of other features that we're going to take a look at. One is some reports that are specifically related to SEC audits, actually. We do have an SEC audit preparation checklist. One of our mantras at Cordium is that there's no reason not to be prepared for an audit. You and we, and it's pretty much public information, know generally what the SEC will ask when they do come in for an audit. And this is a checklist that you can use to go through and really look at all the information that might be required of you and go through and make sure that you have that information, that it's readily available, and that you know who's in charge of keeping those particular records. This checklist gets updated frequently throughout the year as we work with our clients on going through audits and seeing changes in how the SEC operates and what type of information they ask for. The SEC also has very specific requirements as it relates to record keeping. We have a record-keeping checklist here which goes through all of the different areas that you need to think about as it relates to required records. And this will show you all of those information that's required. It will show you some references here, and again, let you go through and check off that you have all of these items and that you know where they are and who is responsible for them. And because we are somewhat running out of time, I'll show you one last feature here, and then I'm going to turn it back to Philip. Finally, we have an AML function, anti-money laundering. We have 35 global AML watch lists that can be used to run your client and investor data through. This is generally used to shadow other parties that may be doing that for you, but this does allow you to sort of run it yourself internally and then run reports on that data. And what you do is you can import in your investor data here. The system automatically runs your investors continuously through those watch lists and would send you an email alert if there was a new watch list match. If there is a watch list match, it will actually show you here detailed information about that match so you can make a determination of whether or not this is the same individual or entity or whether or not it's a false positive, in which case you document that and can then run a report to prove that you've done that check and done the follow-ups that are needed. And that is a brief summary of both of our tools. Again, both items here, ELF and Compliance Track, were designed to help you sort of structure and manage your compliance program no matter where you're regulated or where you're based. And we've been developing these tools for quite a while. We're very excited about our rollout here in Europe. And with that, I will turn it back over to Philip.
Thank you very much, Jordan. A question from me. Lots of documents, good to have the ability to have an audit trail. How safe is the data?
Very good question. We have, and I can actually jump back here to my screen, we have quite a bit of information surrounding our data security and privacy. that is in the application. Basically, each year we go through third-party security audits. We hire a security firm to come in and conduct penetration tests on the application. Okay. We are trustee certified for privacy. The application uses a 256-bit SSL encryption, and we also are certified with the EU-US Safe Harbor.
Okay. There is a question. Are the servers in the EU, and if not, are they safe harbored for data protection purposes?
Which was just that. We just answered that.
Right, so that was very timely. I think there may have been one or two other questions.
It was whether we had EU brokers on the list.
Yes. The majority of the brokers are U.S. institutions. There's probably about 75 or so in the UK, and then another 100 or so in other countries. Some other EU countries, and I believe there's about 30 from India and Australia and New Zealand.
Moving target, I suppose. So if I managed to have a brokerage account, if I was an employee working for a firm, I know it depends on the cooperation of the brokerage firm, is it relatively easy to set up the link to additional brokerage firms?
It really depends. It depends on the broker, and whether or not they have the ability to do that. The practice in the U.S., it's much more prevalent for banks to offer that ability. It's becoming more prevalent in the UK and in the EU. And so as time goes on, we have slowly been adding to that bucket of international banks that we have connections with, but it really is solely dependent on the banks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question, what sanctions lists are the AML checks run against? It's quite a comprehensive list.
Yeah, probably the best thing would be to jump back and show you here. We're going to share the screen again.
I think the last time we looked at it, it was certainly covering all the sanctions list that would be expected out of the UK.
Okay, so this is a list. We have FBI, World Bank, Hong Kong Monetary, OFAC, Australia, Bank of England, some other OFAC lists, Interpol, Ireland Financial Regulator, UN Consolidated Lists, HM Treasury Investment Ban Lists.
The EU Consolidated List and HM is probably,
a bunch of FBI lists and CFTC lists, Chiefs of State and Foreign Cabinet members. So it's about 35 lists in all. Each one of these actually has a little description of the list as well. And those lists are updated on a nightly basis and kept up to date.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure if a firm came along and said, actually, there's a 36th one I'd like, it's relatively easy to create a link to it. Again, it's relatively easy.
Relatively.
Right.
Yeah, we actually use a global provider of AML services called LexisNexis to maintain those watch lists, and we update our data from them every night, and they do a very good job of keeping up to date with various lists. To be honest, there probably are not many lists that they don't cover already.
Yeah, LexisNexis are well known and respected, so it's a good source. So just going back to the presentation, the future of global compliance. So increasing globalization relative to compliance and regulatory obligations, where for a number of years I saw it when I worked at an international bank 7 or 8 years ago, and it's even more the case now. Regulators are increasingly communicating with each other and sharing the findings of each other's experiences, their visits, and also the effectiveness of the rules and requirements that they're implementing in each jurisdiction. So we have a commonality of rules and requirements with some jurisdictional nuances, and anti-bribery in the UK becomes in part pay-to-play in the US. So they're same, but they're different. Increasing regulatory focus on firms. And I think the thing that's created the most excitement, and one of the reasons we're here today, obviously, is introduce firms generally to track and ELF, but also the SEC obligation element. FSA came into being December 2001. For a lot of our clients, they haven't seen the F, or a lot of firms generally, they haven't seen the FSA. They've been focusing on the larger players. Their new focus is doing thematic reviews. So getting an FCA visit or FSA visit was fairly unlikely or rare. So based on that, firms reasonably determined that, well, if we never see the regulator who's based in our jurisdiction, what's the chances of somebody from overseas coming to visit us? And it was nil, and I think reasonably people assumed it was nil. Clearly that's not the case with what we saw one visit last year, but in particular what's been happening since August with the SEC being on the ground, visiting multiple firms, with some trimming back of those visits, as we've heard, and you may have read in the press. So visits have been scaled back or cancelled. The only people who truly know the reason for that are the SEC, but the FCA has been very public about its intention to carry out more thematic reviews, and arising from that, there is definitely a greater likelihood from our own intelligence as well of firms receiving visits. So those visits from the FCA could be on any or every topic, not necessarily a wholesale, no pun intended, review of everything within a firm, but maybe looking at conflicts of interest in ABC, which it has done, but maybe marketing of non-mainstream pooled investments and the new obligations that come in from the 1st of January next year in relation to compliance officer certifications. Or it could be looking at FinProms generally, best execution, or pick a topic. It's fairly well possible that it could be the focus of a thematic review. So harnessing technology is a way to assist with managing and ensuring you know what the requirements of the regulatory systems are. Firms and compliance officers feeling the pressure, we understand this like everybody else with budgets, just like other departments. They have to do more with less and have to work smarter and more efficiently. So how do you stay ahead of the curve? Firstly, you need to ensure you don't fall behind the curve. You need to know and understand the regulatory obligations which apply to your firm. Harnessing software to assist with this is a very good start, especially when it comes to also keeping an audit trail and record of how compliance was achieved. Receiving updates to the system from a reliable source such as Cordium as and when rules change mean you don't get caught out by missing an obscure rule or even a more obvious one. You can even build into Compliance Track your own operational processes to ensure in relation to such that what you expect to be done is being done. Because as a compliance officer, if you're lucky enough to have additional resource, some of those tasks will be carried out by people within your function or even people within different areas of the business. So, in other words, you have to have a system that allows you to demonstrate that you are inspecting what you are expecting to happen. The two principal reasons why firms end up in enforcement, according to an FSA annual conference a few years ago, was lack of governance and lack of oversight. You get those right, you're well on your way to then achieving compliance. So, and of course, there's the mantra that a lot of you will have heard before: if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. So you need to be able to evidence due process and compliance with your obligations. So we'd really like to show you how these systems can work for you and specific requirements and talk to you about those that your firm may have. So contact details of ourselves are displayed at the end of the presentation, and that will be emailed to you, the presentation, along with a recording of the webinar in the next few days. So finally, just approaching the magic hour of 2, just see if there's any additional questions that have come in. A couple of which I think we've dealt with in part. How easy is it to tailor? I think for both, in particular from what I've seen, or maybe it was more the impression it left on me, ELF, the need to engage with developers in Cordium is necessary at the beginning to understand the process, but you can fairly well manage it yourself thereafter.
Not developers, but our support team. It actually can be done yourself. Typically, firms don't like to do that, but it was designed in such a way that you can actually just go on the system day one yourself and sort of customize it. But typically, we do an implementation for clients. It can be as quick as 2 weeks. It can be as long as 6 weeks, depending on how quickly you'd like to move. And generally, as part of that implementation, we work with you to customize the application or applications. We train your employees on how to use the system properly and make sure that everything is sort of tailored to your needs.
Okay. The only other question we had received was how long does it take to implement? So I think you've nicely covered that off. One more has come in. Have you got any plans to add a regulatory change ticker and reporting tool to track?
Not sure I completely understand that question.
It's sort of like when you watch CNN and you get this little ticker coming along, or BBC News, it's a ticker on tracker. So that just says announcement, SEC introduces new requirements too. Sort of a breaking news. I know as I understand it, when you log on to track first thing on a Monday morning, if something is a new requirement coming in, that then needs to be scheduled and considered that then appears as a task that you need to determine or consider. But
Yes.
it's just a tick or more for just regulatory.
Yeah, there is a sort of a news feed that comes in there. That's more of just standard kind of industry news.
Okay.
As it relates to regulatory changes, as you said, right now that information typically gets kicked out to users when things happen. There is no sort of tracker right now with an ongoing kind of list. That information generally, though, is available on the Cordium website. We do have a knowledge base there, which kind of lists really kind of up-to-date changes and news and whatnot. So definitely possible to pull that information into Compliance Track so that you can view that on your dashboard.
Okay. And one more question, a very good question. Hopefully the figure isn't quite as high, but the $64,000 question is, can you give us an indication of the cost?
Well, it does not cost $64,000. I can tell you that. The costs really are dictated by the size of the firm, the structure of the firm, and the tools that are being used. So it really sort of every firm and every client is slightly different. What we do is we put together a proposal after speaking with the client to figure out sort of what those parameters are, what they want to use, what they need to use. And obviously, Sarah's information is up on the screen now. That's something that we can do very quickly without much hassle for you. If you'd like sort of very specific pricing information.
Okay. It's important. I think it's number of users has an effect on the price in relation to PA trading, essentially, because of the broker interactions. Whereas the ELF the track tool isn't so sensitive to the number of people, because usually you're only going to have 4 or 5 people who have access to that tracker. So there's a kind of a scale there.
Okay, it's more on the ELF. Okay, but it's really a case of discussing individual needs with clients, tailoring a solution to their needs, and the appropriate price from that. Okay, no more questions coming through, so with that, I'd like to thank you all for your dialing in, much appreciated. As I said, anybody who has registered for the event, if you weren't able to make it today, but obviously you won't know that because you're not listening, but you will receive the recording and a copy of the presentation over the next few days. And thank you very much, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.